You're listening to episode 167 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness researchers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Cyndi Weeks-Bradley joins us to speak about mindfulness frameworks in education. Mindfulness has been part of academia for some time, starting with Jon Kabat-Zinn at the University of Massachusetts in the late 70s. It's grown since then, finding its way into educational environments of K through 12 more recently, supported by the efforts of those who have been touched by mindfulness influence on their lives. But it's not a hobby. Mindfulness can be quite challenging, and teaching it requires training, experience, and the support of structured learning. Cyndi Weeks-Bradley has over 20 years of data-driven experience in equity, including racial equity. She served as teacher, dean, school-based manager, Boston Principal Fellow, SPED Assistant Principal, Principal and Policy Reviewer, System Builder and Analyst Education Strategist, and Associate Lecturer, as well as founder and CEO of the Equity Process. She holds a master's degree from Simmons University. Our guest today is Cyndi Weeks-Bradley. Cyndi, good to see you again. Welcome.
Nice to see you, Ted. How are you?
I am fine and so glad to see you. And I really, really mean that in so many different ways that we're going to get into in a bit. But what I'd like to do is just have you introduce yourself to the listeners of this podcast and tell us a little bit about your background and what got you into mindfulness.
Nice question, Ted. So I'm Cyndi Weeks-Bradley. I have a huge education background. I was a teacher, dean, a vice principal. I've been a co-founder of an alternative ed school, assistant principal, and a principal. And I worked for the state of Massachusetts Education, DOE, for some time. And I left that and started my own business full time, which I've been dabbling with for many years. So that's just a little bit about me and my background. And what got me into mindfulness was actually COVID. I started to lean into COVID about 2 years ago after losing my dad to COVID. I had to lean into what COVID meant. I had to lean into what the pandemic meant. And I found mindfulness as a way of helping me to heal and understand life and to really center myself because I was going through a really tough time just adjusting in 2020 to all that was happening around me.
Yeah. And I like the way you phrase that, leaning into what was happening. And this is one of the things that we've talked about on this podcast many times and elsewhere is that mindfulness is turning towards rather than turning away. And that's a bit of a challenge sometimes, as you know.
Yeah, it was challenging. It was far from easy. It was very challenging. Um, it wasn't all the way new. I'm from Barbados, so you hear a lot in my culture. You got to be mindful about this, be mindful about that, be cognizant. So it wasn't 100% new. It was just different from what I was accustomed to in my regular everyday life and really naming it. And then owning it was the biggest difference. But it wasn't 100% new, but very difficult nevertheless.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you had joined me and many others for a recent mindfulness-based stress reduction course, and I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share a little bit about, had you taken formal mindfulness training before that, and then what was it like being in that course before and after, and then some other things that have been happening in your life too, if you want to share what we were talking about earlier and some of how that's a very different experience for you this time around.
Sure, thanks, Ted. So I had I would say formal, but very short and a little disconnected. But then I became very interested so let me just back up a little bit. Once I left working for the Department of Education, I actually returned to school and went to Brown University and did their executive leadership and coaching program.
Mhm.
In that course, then I found out more about mindfulness on a deeper level. But I was practicing on my own, taking, short classes here and there, a 3 hour class, a 2 hour class, a 1 hour class. And after that, I started at Stanford University doing their applied compassion program. And then I was like, oh, I really got to get deeper into this mindfulness because because I want to help other people learn it. It's really helping me. And I signed up for your course only because I got to be honest, I needed it to get to the teacher certification.
Yeah,
So
all
I
right.
thought, you remember our first conversation? I was like, well, I'm just here to be a teacher, and it's a prerequisite. So that's what I really believed, honestly, when I signed up. I think going through those weeks with you were transformative because you'd ask this question, why are you here? And it's like, I know why I'm here. I'm here to get this prerequisite so I can become a teacher. That's why I'm here. You asked me this already. And then you'd say journal. And then it got a little deeper in subsequent classes. No, why are you really here? And then we'd have another class. No, 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 no. Why are you really here? And what I noticed is my inner voice became different with why I was here or why I was there at the time. It started out was I joined for a very technical reason. And that reason was it was a prerequisite to get where I needed to go. I'm one of those people that I'm going to get it done, right?
Yeah.
And then I recognized I was there for me midway through your class. And, one day it was like, well, why are you really here? And I remember we were meditating and you asked that question and it was the most like awakening experience. I heard a voice inside of me said, "You're here for a divine purpose." And I opened my eyes and everyone was still meditating. So I closed my eyes again and I just sat with that for a while. And I've been sitting with it ever since. And most recently, when my mom got really sick and I had to be by her side on a daily basis, that little voice came back explaining to me, you were there for a bigger purpose than you could ever imagine because I would not have been able to get through what I got through with my mom had not been for your class and mindfulness and compassion and just my overall leadership altogether.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And this, an important thing for folks who are listening to this is it's not class with Ted. It's that you, Cyndi, did the work of you did your own practice, you did your own exploration, you did that deep work of finding out what's here right now and
Yeah,
develop that deeper curiosity to be able to, when listening closely, finding that inner voice that's you singing to you about your life, and that
yeah.
that shifted things, and that's wonderful. I also want to talk about what you're doing now and some of the things that you've been working on in education. There are a couple different
Yeah.
frameworks that you have, some healthcare stuff that you're doing, and then maybe we can wrap it up with a little bit of discussion about the equity process. So tell us a little bit about the frameworks in education. Let's start there.
Oh wow, Ted. So, with my business, what I've come to understand is that we need a little bit more in education, and I think that little bit more is compassion and mindfulness. So, I've created this framework called Reiki, and it's really about relationship building, engagement. So Reiki's actually the acronym. Us educators like acronyms, so that's the acronym. And the acronym stands for relationship building, engagement. And when we're talking about relationship building, we're looking at the relationships with teachers and students, students to students, relationships from with adults to adults throughout the building, and just thinking about that culture.
Mhm.
Then the E stands for engaging. We're looking at how engaging the lesson plans and the exercises and activities really are as teachers are implementing them. Are students like really into them, or are they disengaged? Is there ownership with the work that's going on? And then the C stands for challenging. I moved away from the word rigor a while ago
Yeah.
because just how rigor impacted brown and black kids was a little different.
Yeah.
So I tend to like the word challenging. So are the lessons challenging? Are they pushing students? Are they moving them out of the comfort zone to the learning zone, and really not getting them into that panic zone that we speak about? But what is going on with those challenging exercises? And then the first I is for impact. How's it even impacting our students? Because if we're not looking at the impact, then we're not even assessing the data, right? We're not analyzing. We don't know if it's working or not. The next I is for instruction. At the end of the day, we're in school. So are you looking at the objectives? Are you looking at the standards? Are you able to teach the skills within the standards? Like what is going on there and how can we support? And the last I is the biggest I, which is inclusion, because if a child does not feel included, if a teacher does not feel included, if an administrator does not feel included in the environment, then we have lost it all. So really thinking about how can we ensure that there's a sense of belonging and everyone feels as though this is their home when they leave their home. I do believe that schools should be the safest places from your home, and some homes aren't that safe.
Yeah.
So we should ensure that schools are always that safe place, that safe zone, that brave zone for students and faculty.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's so lovely to hear this in so many ways because what you described has an underlying theme of connection,
Yeah,
that this occurs in a social setting. And the more that we can incorporate and welcome, have this invitational space rather than a forced declaration,
yeah,
that makes things so much better. And I love the way you shifted things a little bit, noticing that rigor can be met in a certain way that is not as helpful as challenge.
yeah,
Because challenge, we talked about this in the MBSR course. I do this in other mindfulness courses where there's a visual that Dan Siegel created, which is a terrific visual on our window of tolerance,
mhm,
and that as a window of tolerance, there's hypo aroused and hyper aroused, and it didn't really include challenged on either end of that. So in my own visuals for courses, I added that in because being challenged, as you said so correctly, so is that's where the most learning comes from. That's where
yeah.
growing comes from. There's the couch potato space. And then there's the challenge, like when I'm learning a new skill or playing a game or doing something, whatever it
Yeah,
happens to be, that challenge is like, yeah. And you're still in the window of tolerance. You're still in the space
mhm,
of, but I got this,
that's right.
not overwhelmed. And you describe that so beautifully because it is a dynamic interaction. And again, also the way you describe this, that community, that connection around safety, that safety is not just something we declare. If we
No.
declare this is safe, then we're also implying everywhere else is not safe. And how does that feel? Not so good. But it's something
Right.
we co-create together in an
Yes,
atmosphere of challenge. And it's okay to be challenged. That's where we can really thrive.
that's right. Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%.
So that you mentioned two frameworks. You got another one. Say a little bit about that too.
Uh, so my other framework is one that I'm really excited about because it's a visual. And for some time, before mindfulness, I was
Pre-mindfulness.
literally knocking myself over the head. Like, what is so difficult about this actual way of being when we talk about equity that people can't get? It's not that hard.
Yeah.
And then through mindfulness, I figured out it is that complex, right? Like if you've never lived a life of inequity, how do you even begin to notice, what equity looks like? Because it's just a part of who you are and you may be taking it for granted, right?
Exactly.
So I had to really dig a lot deeper as I got, more close to my practice and more close to my inner guide. And I created a tool I created an archetype. called The Archetype of the 21st Century Equitable Educator. Very long title, but it has a visual that goes along with it, an icon. And then this icon has little orbiting icons. But it's really, so that people can see themselves as educators and think about what do you really need? In the American system, as I said, I come from another country, I come from Barbados. And there's this whole cultural aspect, and there's also this academic aspect of life, right? In Barbados, like there's 100% literacy in a very small island. It doesn't have a lot. Then America has a lot, and there's illiteracy, right?
Tons of resources.
So I come from these two worlds biculturally, and now I'm saying I'm tricultural with mindfulness. And that to me is the glue. But when I look at who I could be as an educator and I think about the left brain attributes and the right brain attributes, we really focus on the left brain attributes, like analysis and things like that. And we don't go to compassion in the heart. So my icon begins to look at what we may be comfortable with over in the left side or the right side of the brain and really begin to build what you need to be this 21st century equitable educator. And that comes along with professional development. But this icon also serves another purpose. And one of the big topics now in schools is hiring for diversity, which is not what we should be hiring for. We should be consulting and thinking about diversity hiring, which is a little different. So, hiring for diversity pretty much means we got to get others in this building to represent children or to be a representation for children to see. And diversity hiring is we need to get others in this building through a process of merit. So we're getting the added fit into the buildings. We're getting the just right. We're getting the people that students really need beyond the color of their skin or sexual orientation or abilities or whatever the case might be. And we're looking a lot deeper at what is merit. And by that, we can also begin to think about, is this merit really equitable? Like, how are we viewing merit and how we should be viewing merit to open the doors for all and not just some? So my icon actually serves the purpose for that because when you start to think about who is in my building, then you can start to think about who needs to be in the building as I hire for the following year.
Yeah. What are the gaps that need to be filled that are
That's
going to
right.
contribute to the overall experience for students and faculty and staff
There
and
you go, Ted.
the general dynamic of that area is it's not just one thing. It's not just a
No.
quota system. It's what is going to provide the most value to the needs that are present right now.
That's right. Yeah. Because my belief, Ted, honestly, is that we're not here to tell kids who they will become in the future.
Right.
We're here to help them design who they will be. We're here to help, support them in becoming and actualizing who they believe they should be. And those are the reason for my two frameworks and tools.
Yeah. And what I like about those frameworks in education is back when when I was a kid, education was about memorizing stuff. That
Yeah,
was education. And it's not to say there weren't teachers who did not try to help us grow and learn about ourselves as people. There were, and they were wonderful. Those are the treasured teachers that we had and remembered. But there seems to be a shift in education that's more understanding of it's not just can I remember the dates of this, that, or the other thing. It's what are the implications of what I'm learning? And how does this
that's
help
right.
me within a context of my life, my family, my society, my culture, the world? Because the implications now in contemporary society are global. It is
That-
far less
That's right.
insular. What I do impacts everything around me. And that's now very clear, I think, in large part due to social media and the digital transformation. We now know the effects of what we do and more quickly. And it's more difficult to have that willful ignorance about what we do impacting not just me, but the world around me.
Yes, Ted, you nailed it. Yes, exactly. And I think sometimes we don't think about the impact, we just do.
Yeah.
And our American education system was founded on just doing. Rockefeller needed to get producers, right?
Yep.
But in the 21st century, production is not enough. We have to really think about the impact and we have to think about how technology has changed our world. It was not there in the early 1900s, right? So, how do we then begin to shift? Because to do a whole education reform, it's going to be complex, too many layers, but to actually think about where we are now and support what's there and allow it to lift us a little more. I think that's the areas that my tools will support schools, and I'm finding that they are. I'm in several districts around Massachusetts and even in the country. Yeah, I'm in several districts, and what I'm finding is that people are just like, where were you all my life with this information? And I was fighting every single system I was in to do this work. And it wasn't until I said, okay, enough, Cyndi, just, once again, inner voice, right? Inner guide, believe in yourself. You can do it. And I stepped out and I got my first letter from the Library of Congress. And I was like, oh, I got it. Library of Congress. And it just helped my confidence some more and really believing in me. And once again, I'll go back to being compassionate with myself, and really talking to myself in a positive way and encouraging myself, as well as being mindful that everything is not always going to go my way. And when it doesn't, what can that response look like now versus in reflection what it looked like before and what was the impact or is going to be the impact of my response.
Yeah. Well said. Really, really well said.
Thank
So let's
you.
shift a little bit over to healthcare.
Yeah.
You did some work co-creating a patient experience in a particular role as a caretaker
Yeah.
dealing with doctors, which has its own nuances and challenges. Speaking of challenges, tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, wow. So I think once again, I'm not selling mindfulness in any ways. I'm just saying how it's really helped me to be aware and exercise non-judgment and, just trust myself even more. I mean, I've always trusted myself, but it's a little different now because I know that there's some tools out there that says you better trust yourself, girl. It feels really good to know that they're out there. I think I even said that to you one day in class or the class.
Yeah.
So I'm in this position now where like 2 years ago I had to take care of my dad, and I literally had to teach that hospital how to be compassionate without any formal training, just my own heart, my own soul, who I am as an individual, my own core. Um, with my father, he had COVID and went through, the whole operation, and he was, not doing well. And I had one doctor that will say, "You need to stop. Okay, he's not going to survive, and you need to stop." And I didn't like that doctor much. And I'd say, I don't want to talk to you, right? Because we're not on the same page. I need to talk to someone else. And I found myself in a situation where no one wanted to talk because everyone in the hospital was pretty afraid. And once I found out that fear was leading, then I had to switch it up. I started emailing, and I'd email the music for my dad and tell them, play music in his room. If we talk to plants and they grow, someone's going to be in that room with him. And I'd record my voice and send it to them and say, play it for my dad. And my dad became a real person to them. And I saw the compassion shift with my father. He came out of a coma, had a trach in his throat, and was talking. And I sent an iPad in, and we were talking on iPad, and he's not supposed to talk. So I say, just listen, we listen to music together and that kind of thing. But because of me, I saw how the hospital was shifting.
Yeah.
My father later lost his life to a heart attack, not understanding COVID. Like, those are the things that come along with the disease, right?
Mm.
Um, but recently, 2 years later, my mom got really ill, and she was in the hospital. And I found that, doctors were moving really, really fast and they weren't slowing down. And, the new mindful me knows, okay, we need to take a pause, people, right?
Mm.
So I started to talk to them about compassion, like literally naming it. I need you to be compassionate when you're dealing with my mom and you're dealing with me. And I would say that to them, like, straight up. I can't tell you what to do with your patients, the other ones, but when you're here, we are co-creating the experience because you don't know her. I know her, and you know medicine. I need you, you need me. And I had one doctor in particular. Can I say her name? Is that okay? Mhm.
I think you could say it. I think it'll be
Okay.
okay.
Shout out to Dr. Kennedy. Okay. So I had Dr. Kennedy was like, Thank you for that reminder, because sometimes we become so engrossed in our jobs that we really look at people like patients. And you're reminding us that we need to look at your mom as a mom. And this doctor was with me every time my mother was admitted to the hospital. I'd say, "Can I have Dr. Kennedy?" Because I knew she got it. And in the end, I told Dr. Kennedy, Stanford University has medical school has this, Stanford Cares has a program in compassion, and I need you to do it. And she considered doing it, but just co-creating that experiencing and naming it and letting people know, like speaking up and advocating for yourself and for your loved one is very important. You can't just sit back and let them do whatever they want to do. They are the experts in medicine, so you have to trust that to a certain degree, but you are the expert in your care, the one that you're taking care of's life, and you have to speak up for them, especially when they're unable to speak up for themselves. And in both situations with my parents, I was the healthcare proxy, so I had to, you know, honor them in ways that I thought they would have done the job. And that's what I would want people to do, like learn to speak up for yourself and learn to speak up for the people that you're taking care of and learn to trust the doctors, because there's no way that you can have that um symbiotic relationship without that trust and without that co-creating experience. But really naming it for them and naming it for yourself first
Hmm.
is very important.
Yeah. And again, this is the whole, I love that you're using co-create because it doesn't happen without
No.
several people together nourishing and gosh, what's a way to articulate this? Let's just go with nourishing the space where care can happen.
Yeah.
There's medical care, yes, absolutely, and that's what the docs, the nurses, they know how to do that really, really well.
They
And there is
do.
that trust of you have that knowledge that I don't.
That's right.
And I'm also, this person, it doesn't just end there. There's also what can contribute to their physical health is their mental and
Yeah.
emotional health as well. And this is where I'm seeing a bit of a shift. It sounds like in healthcare, it's also a field in which I work, is that the awareness that compassion is not a bad thing. That once upon a time, medical care and medical treatment was very antiseptic,
Yeah.
very based on just the materialistic aspects to things, which are still the foundation and should be a foundation of this. Not the only one. That doctors who and nursing professions and others in healthcare, caregivers in general of whatever stripe, uh, what they'll run into is there are difficulties here.
Yeah.
Natural human responses to withdraw. And of course, that's understandable why that would be difficult day in and day out to have that experience. And yet, shifting that from, and I think we've talked about this in class, sympathy,
Yeah.
intellectually understand another's suffering on top of that empathy. Okay, now
Yeah.
there's an emotional response to this that is triggered and still is wholly mine. I don't feel
Yeah.
what someone else feels, I feel what I feel.
Right.
Maybe kicked off by something that occurs.
Mhm.
But on top of that, if we just stop there, that will, of course, lead to overwhelm. That
Right.
will lead to
Yeah.
burnout. That will lead to leaving the
Yep.
profession or our own severe depression, anxiety, and other stuff
Mhm.
if we don't that allow that to process with compassion, which
Yes,
is where the
Ted.
nourishment comes in.
Yeah.
Think about, and any of us could do this. Think about last time you gave someone a hand and helped
Yeah.
someone out in some way. How did that feel?
Yeah.
Oh, energizing, revitalizing. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Compare
Yeah.
that to just pulling away and just taking on more and more suffering. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the value of compassion.
It
And we did
is.
that with that program and continue to support that because that planted seeds that can grow from Dr. Kennedy, we can name them more than once, and others that you touched.
Yeah. You saw it, Ted. It started with Dr. Kennedy, but then you saw the nurses, then you saw the nurses' assistants, and you saw the doctors when Dr. Kennedy was off, right? So it started off with Dr. Kennedy, and it was very clear, dry, cut, cut, cut in the beginning. But once she was in there for a few days, I was like, no, like we need to do more. Even down to I was the person, my mom always would have like a moisturizer on her lips. So it would usually be me coming in or my brother or my cousin or someone coming in and say, oh, her lips are dry. after they saw my mom is my mom and they saw she's a human and we have and there was humility there. I'm the
Mhm.
doctor and you're the patient. They were like equal. I never saw my mom's lips dry again down to the end. I never ever. And that's the things, evidence, right? Evidence that this is working was
Right.
something as simple as Vaseline on her lips. And they didn't use the hospital moisturizer. They actually used Vaseline. So and she liked Vaseline on her lips,
Yeah.
believe it or not. So those are some of the evidential ways that you saw compassion really working and being applied from when it first started. It was like, well, she's a patient and this is what we're going to do and this is what we're going to do it and this is how it's going to be done to, do you need anything? I'm about to touch you. She was very afraid of needles in the beginning. It was like, well, this is we got to draw your blood. Like, come on. And as they, really let their guard down to a certain degree to get to know her, it was like, we're going to give you a needle, but it's a butterfly. So you saw the shift in how they began to treat her while they were applying compassion. And that felt good. And one could only hope that it continues with many patients to come.
Yeah, and I imagine felt good for them as well.
It did. They told me.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that story too. And one final thing I'd like to ask about is for you to tell us a little bit about the equity process.
Sure. So the equity process is the name of my organization, my company. And I just want to start by saying the reason it's called the equity process is because the work that we're doing is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. Some of us get it quicker than others, and that's okay. That's why you have equity, right? For those of us that may struggle, we want to be able to support them in ways that matter to them and matter to the work and matter to students and families. So, thus the equity process. The reason that we exist is really to bring a sense of awareness, a sense of humility, a sense of shifting from empathy to compassion for students who have been marginalized for years due to no degree of their own, just because of who they are, just because of their birthright. And then we even think about how does that, work for the adults? Because as we go around, meet myself and my consultants, and we interview people, we realize that adults are really hurt as well. They've obviously learned how to hide it or keep it, dormant. But during interviews, you find out things, and you're like, oh, that is like so painful, and trying to support them and also understanding their pain and how their pain may be in response to a student's pain. Like when you see a student exercising said behavior, it may trigger you. And it could just be that triggering that causes you to respond in a way that may be a little inappropriate, you know what I mean? Or hurtful to the student. And how do we I would guess balance that so I understand, hey, here's where I am right now. And due to set the tone, and that's my little acronym for sensations, emotions, and thoughts. So, what are the sensations I'm feeling when I'm triggered? And what emotions came about? And what are the thoughts? And what can I do now? Do I I tell people once you can figure that out, I automatically say take a few deep breaths, right? 3 or 4 deep breaths just to refresh and oxygenize yourself and then think of the choice you are going to make. And don't just stop at thinking about that choice, but think about the impact of that choice. Because if we can think about the impact of the choice, maybe our choice may be more aligned with what we want. And what I'm finding out is that we don't have bad people. We just have people that are living in sometimes not an aligned way, and they don't even notice it.
Right.
And I think before I started to get deep into the work and I have surveys and interviews and really, being there with people, I made the assumption and I judged that how don't you know that? Like that's just duh. And I've come to recognize there is no duh and there is no judgment. And we just need to walk this journey together so you can choose your path and I can support you along your way. And my consultants can support you along the way. And oftentimes I say to leaders, like, I'm not enough. I walk away. So I do need you to take a mindful class, whatever that class is, and I give them resources. But you should take a class so we can do this together. So it's all about co-creating the experience for that district and not just for me or that individual because I leave. I'm not there all the time, and the work is theirs to do.
Right. And that, yes, that's the main point here is that it's not dependent on you to keep that going. It is
No.
from their own efforts, like your own efforts in taking the mindfulness courses is it's based on you.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. That means it is in your hands. You do get to choose.
Yes.
And that's incredibly powerful, that
It is.
agency. Great. Well, thank you so much. Anything else you want to share with the listeners before we go?
Well, I think what I would share with the listeners is, once again, one thing for sure is I see people that know me and they're like, oh, I want to do this. You did this, or I want to be more like you. And I would just say we're all unique individuals. Like, love yourself for who you are and find out what your path is and trust yourself along the way. People often ask me about my confidence, and I think my confidence or my courage comes along with just trusting me, listening to getting closer to that voice inside. When the voice inside say, "Hey, girl, you better listen," I tend to listen, and I get grief like from others about it. It's not easy, but setting those boundaries and really becoming one with yourself is important. So, if you haven't found that path, try, centering yourself and getting closer on the path of you, so you can make choices that impact the world differently and make a difference to those around you and yourself.
Wonderful. Our guest today, Cyndi Weeks Bradley. You can find out more about her work at the website, which will be linked on the episode page for this episode, theequityprocess.org. Cyndi, thank you so much for being here. So good to see you.
Thank you, Ted. It was a pleasure. Nice to see you as well.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come and visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.